Good afternoon, everybody. This is the first of the design talk, and we're very happy and honored to have here with us design curator Lili Online from Austria. Lili is an independent design curator and director of the Vienna Design Festival, Vienna Design Week, actually. Gutamura Guedes from Portugal. She's the director of experimental design, one of the most cutting-edge events that people into design don't have to miss. And the theme of the talk is curating design, and will be moderated by Alice Rawthorne, design critic of International New York Times and author of this amazing book that I warmly suggest to read, called Hello World, When Design Meets Life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Cristina, and thank you to you for taking a break from MIART to come and hear our talk today. As Maria Cristina said, this is the first talk in the design program, so there'll be other talks about design as MIART goes on. The theme of this one is curating design, so I'm going to begin with really a sort of potted history of where we are now in terms of curating design, which of course Guta and Lili may well vehemently disagree with, in which case they'll make their views known later. But if we look back historically, design curation has typically been a fairly specialist activity, and it was really rooted historically in the great international expositions of the 19th century, which were huge showcases that individual cities would stage to show off manufacturing industry and to try and enthuse the public about manufacturing and to encourage manufacturers to raise their standards. And many of what we now think of as our great design museums sprang from these exhibitions, like MAC in Vienna and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The other stereotype is of the architecture and design departments of modern art museums that emerged during the 20th century at museums like MoMA in New York, Centre Pompidou in Paris, and the Stedelijk Museum in the Netherlands. But just as museums like MAC and the V&A their focus tended to move from design to the decorative arts, often the focus of these departments was very much on architecture rather than design. But recently, all that has changed dramatically. There's been an explosion of activity in design curation. And among the catalysts are the sort of festivals like Vienna Design Week, which Lili organizes in Austria, and the events that Experimenta Design organizes under Guta, because they have acted as a catalyst for lots of experimentation in design curation. Another phenomenon is that many visual arts institutions have integrated design as part of their programs. The Serpentine Galleries in London have done so. They currently have an exhibition of the work of the Italian designer Martino Gamper. So has the Barbican Art Gallery in London, as have Artist Space and the New Museum in New York. Similarly, some of the existing decorative arts museums are significantly expanding their design programs. The V&A is doing so under a new team in London, as the Metropolitan Museum of Art is about to do in New York. If you then add in the fact that scores of new design museums are being built all over the world, over a dozen in China alone, and the fact that design is being embedded at the start of many of the most interesting new museums of art, like M+ in Hong Kong, you can see that we have a very interesting situation. And it's not just that there's more and more design curation. Its emphasis is changing. It's becoming much more ambitious and sophisticated. And this partly reflects the changes in design practice, the increasing emphasis on ethical and environmental responsibility, social and political issues, the fact that digital technology is transforming our lives, so design curation is increasingly important as a means of navigating those changes, and also the emergence of conceptual design, which is becoming increasingly critical of contemporary culture in much the way that contemporary art has done traditionally. And design curators like Paolo Antonelli at MoMA in New York and Jan Bolen at Z33 in Hasselt in Belgium are very much at the forefront of this. this. So we've had this explosion of activity and this quite dramatic change of emphasis and raising of ambition. So it seems very timely to ask, where do we go from here? Is the explosion of activity going to be sustainable, or is it just a short-term blip? And what are the big challenges facing design curation now and in the future? But I'm going to begin by asking both Guta and Lily to explain how they personally came to design curation, how they discovered design and why they decided to focus on it, and then we'll talk about the general issues. So Lily, first of all with you, how did you come to design curation?
How I came to design was growing up in a family that is involved in architecture and design. So I was sort of raised with some of the figures in design. But coming to design curation was while I was studying design. I started writing for a daily newspaper, and I started working on the first exhibitions. And my first major exhibition was, of course, Memphis Design, because I think that was something really influential in my personal life. And then there were a few years where I really had to stay away from design and focus toward architecture, both in my writing and critique and in exhibitions. In order to embrace design more than ever in these 8 years in the existence of Vienna Design Week that I've founded together with 2 colleagues, and we've always also worked as the curators of many formats of this festival. And why I so passionately stay with it now is that the festival and all the other activities that I have the chance to take up show such a widespread field of what design can be that I can avoid the feeling that my life is about looking at furniture, which I wouldn't like it to be.
So can you be more specific about how design has evolved during that period and why it's sustained your interest?
Well, as you mentioned previously, at the moment we witness a change in design from a more classical understanding what design is to design coming back to the role as something that is very strongly related to social responsibility or to social transition. So. I have next to a format where I work with designers and manufacturers, which might end up in a more like edition kind of thing. At the same time, I work on a social design project, which goes into a totally different direction. And I think people like Jan Boelen or Hilary Cottam or people like that are the important figures of a new way of developing a view on design.
And Guta, how did you come to design?
So, Experimenta started 15 years ago, and in fact, I co-founded with 2 designers, but I was not a designer, and I was not completely into design at that moment. But nevertheless, for me, my 2 main interests, I would say 20 years ago, if concerning design, would be connected with 2 very specific perspectives. One completely connected with culture. So I was interested in material culture, in trying to understand the meaning of our production. On the other hand, I was very, very much interested in understanding design as a tool of communication. So how we do communicate through objects. So that was the very beginning of my first approach to design. And in fact, Experimenta, when we started in Lisbon 15 years ago, it was designed to be a curatorial platform, of course, but without a specific purpose. We were just really in the beginning experimenting several ways of doing research in the design field.
So it was very, very, very much connected with, I would call it a serious interest on researching about design, on studying more on design. Because 15 years ago, you would have Milano, you would have lots of commercial events about design. You would have some institutions like Pompidou already and some institutions doing design exhibitions, but not that much, in fact. And in terms of events, you wouldn't have those sort of events with this very underlined profile of a curatorial perspective. So it was a combination of factors, in fact.
And why have you stayed with design? Why has it held your interest over the years?
Well, because definitely for me it is one of the most interesting tools that we have and disciplines, no doubts about it. I don't have any doubt about it. I do adore art. I love architecture, music, literature, but for me, design, it's the discipline where you really can find some of the subjects that are more important for me. Namely, subjects connected with doing a service for society. So that's also a very important dimension for me. The idea of that you have a client, that you are producing something that it is definitely a service for society. Lily was talking about social design. We are all talking about social design nowadays and sustainability. So all those issues are definitely connected with design and with the future of design. So not only from the cultural perspective, trying to understand the meaning of the objects or the meaning of a gesture that then ends on a chair or on a very normal object, but also connected with this impact on society. I think that for me, it is one of the disciplines of the 21st century, definitely, one of the tools. And that's the reason.
And if we look specifically at curation, when people use the term curation, they inevitably think of art. And when most people are asked to imagine a design exhibition, they'd have difficulty distinguishing it from a trade fair or a department store, because they're the sort of dreary old-fashioned stereotypes that tended to dominate for a long time. What do you feel is the current state of design curation, and has it succeeded in developing an independent identity from art curation? Lily, if you address this first.
Well, I'd say at the moment we have a classical way of curation still, which means selecting something in order to tell a story. But I think what is more important than ever is in the role of the curator, that you are in the position of someone who makes joints between people and initiates a project, rather, that comes into being in the course of the exhibition or a festival or whatever you're working on. So I think the role of design curators changes in a way that you're in many cases really involved in the process of something coming into being, rather than judging an existing thing and putting it into a context with other things or a space.
So from a practical perspective, in terms of the presentation of the work, the interpretation of the work, and how an exhibition or an event is structured, what as a design curator do you feel you have to do that an art curator needn't necessarily do? And conversely, what can't you do?
I think the role of art curators has in some parts changed too, and maybe some of it is true for art curators too. So what I think it's simply on first hand, it's not such a glamorous role for sure, and I think that it starts to mingle, and I think this is what makes it so interesting at the moment, that there is art curators that develop a certain interest in design. As you mentioned, the Serpentine showing Martino Campa or Letizia Ragaglia of the Museum in Bozen, who was just here with us, who's showing Martino too. That that shows that from that perspective, from the art perspective, it's changing. From the design perspective, I wouldn't maybe mix up the two in a show.
Guta, what for you are the differences and similarities between the two approaches?
Well, in the very beginning with Experimenta, we didn't make any difference. So we had art curators curating design exhibitions, people coming from different fields, so we didn't make any difference. And to be sincere, I think that I'm not worried with the kind of tools that curators use to reach an objective. I'm more worried with the kind of objectives they want to prove or to show with their curatorial process. So for me, it's not important if a design curator uses the same strategies of an art curator, of a musician curator, or something like that. That's not the point. The point is if there is any difference when you come into the design field, and what are those differences, if there are any differences. I think that if we are talking about an exhibition that has a statement or something that it wants to be proved with the exhibition, I think that the process is very similar, still very similar. If you are in the art field or if you are in the design field, the process is similar. But when you do, what for me is really different is when you tend to treat design as art. That's a different thing. You know
so
me
how
for,
is it different?
You know me for many years, and this has been a subject at Experimenta many times in the very beginning. I have serious doubts about the borders between design and art, and about the tools and strategies that designers are using, and artists are using, and architects are using now. I find it very thrilling in many aspects, because we are looking at a very exciting moment. But nevertheless, it was, what's your name? Carlo? Yeah. Marco was telling me about the exhibition he's curating about Bruno Munari, and he was telling that he's picking only the relation of Bruno Munari with art. So you see, this is a very old issue, So I think that I'm not worried with the differences, in fact. I'm worried with what are the aims of the design curators nowadays. And especially, I would like to call more people into the debate. So not people connected with art and with culture, but also people connected with science and with technology, so from different fields, sociology and so on. Because, again, I think that design is really a common ground for many things. So I'm not worried exactly with that.
Returning to our theme, as a sort of provocation for you both, but this doesn't come from me, it comes from the Serpentine Gallery, which, now it's opened a second space in London, is very keen to integrate design as part of its programme and to do at least one major design exhibition every year. However, it imposes one very important distinction on the designers it invites to create shows for the gallery, as opposed to the artists, and that is that the artists are allowed to create exhibitions solely from their own work, whereas it always wants the designers to curate an exhibition which can include their own work, but has to have a broader message as well. And when I asked Julia Peyton-Jones, one of the co-directors, why this was, she said it's because we don't want it to end up looking like a department store. So Lily, do you agree with that, or do you feel it would be acceptable for a designer simply to show their work as artists have traditionally done?
I think that is absolutely possible, and I think it's something that Chris Derkon has showed in his time at Haus der Kunst, where he has staged solo exhibitions, for instance, with Konstantin Gricic-Droch, and they did not look like a department store. And The other thing why I think the idea is still tempting to ask designers to always involve other people that they see as influential or maybe sisters and brothers in mind is that still design is a discipline that not many people have idea in depth of. So I think the more you can tell and show, it can be helpful. So, for instance, if the Serpentine asks Martino to invite people in, it's very interesting to see what he looks at, because he takes his I wouldn't say impressions, but he is connected with many people in the history and in contemporary.
And picking up very quickly on something you said just then, you said design is a discipline that not many people know about, so it needs more interpretation. Is that perhaps a difference between art and design curation? That, I mean, this is an endless discussion for curators in every discipline. How much interpretation do you give? Do you feel with design it has to be clearer?
I think design can be totally intuitive, but what I thought about while Gute was mentioning, like especially with what I do with the festival, is I try, of course, to provide something for a professional audience, but at the same time, a festival can only exist with a broader public, and this is also my mission to give people an idea of what design can be. I don't think that would be a good idea as a curatorial intention for art, to make it as accessible to a broader public, because I simply don't think it would work.
Gute, going back to the Serpentine, this differentiation.
I think that concerning Serpentine or any other example you could give, I think it's a strategy of the institution. So Julia Peyton-Jones just decided that for design it's like that and for art it's like that, because she wants to establish a profile for Serpentine in terms of design. Myself at Experimenta, each time we start developing each edition and we invite curators to come to Lisbon and to discuss the program, we have certain rules that in a way define the output of each Biennale. So I'm used to insist on the idea of research. I'm used to insist on the idea of producing new let's call it objects or new outputs. I'm used to insist on the idea of Experimenta doesn't want to show things that has been shown already, so we need to put some money not only on the curatorial and research process, but also to produce more again, I call it objects. So I think it is a question of defining a profile of Serpentine, of an institution. It's a choice that you can make. It's not a question that design needs that sort of approach. I don't feel that if you want to show design, you can't show it as the way you show art. I don't feel that. Nevertheless, and being a bit controversial here, of course, we are used to art exhibitions for years and years and years. So we have already a language and we have already a way of understanding many things that in the design field you don't have. So the kind of work that you need to do, it's different there. If you want to approach more people, if you want to become more democratic, if you want to address certain issues that are fundamental to be understood, you need to do different kinds of work. That's a fact. So when you design an event or a program of an institution that is devoted to design, you need to think about that if you want to think. But it's all, for me, it's always connected with what kind of identity you want to create for your own institution or for your own gallery or for your own institution. If you want to devote it more into research, into sharing information, into debate, you know, the work that Paula has been done at MoMA, it's absolutely connected with science, with new technologies, with digital design. So she knows what she's doing and she wants to do that. I think that what Julia is proposing for Serpentine, it's, for me, I don't know if I'm correct, but for me, it's a way to underline or to establish a line between art and design. It's like saying, Serpentine, we were dealing with art, we were dealing with architecture, and now we are dealing with design this way. It's an option.
Well, and the other sort of parallel to design curation, in addition to art, is of course cultural anthropology. And the two disciplines have sort of run in alignment for some time. And it's something that museums that collect design are now adopting an increasingly directly anthropological approach in the language they use, the criteria they use to acquire. So an example would be the Victoria and Albert Museum with its new rapid response collecting strategy. It may not necessarily pursue it in perpetuity, but certainly for a year or two it wants to collect a series of objects that it feels really reflect our time. What do you think about this approach, Lily? Do you feel it's valid and useful, or is it a curatorial gimmick that may not necessarily be sustained?
I think something that also connects again to your previous question is what about a movement in design and also in the art, if you say performance art, how do you exhibit it? The same is true at the moment for many design movements that work with society. Of course, it is very interesting if you have a scientific research and a curatorial approach on that. But at the same time, I think what the museums and these huge institutions that are so much dealing with the history of the future somehow are looking for is something which is more intermediate, where you sort of can witness or can be part of these processes. And this is what also design is moving to involve the society. So of course the research is important, but I think even more important is that these museums find a way of staging that really real time in the museum. And partly they do manage. I think that also programs like the Designer in Residence at the V&A, where you have these workshops, things. I mean, Designer in Residence is an old idea, but the way I see what is going on there, it looks like, you can really get involved.
Guta, do you see cultural anthropology as a sustainable curatorial strategy in design?
Well, I would say that was exactly the perspective when Experimenta started. So when we designed Experimenta, we were coming from Milano. In fact, it was the Salone in 1998. And we have been listening to lots of designers and critics and teachers and practitioners complaining about the absence of discussion around design coming from the cultural perspective. And so we arrived to Lisbon and we created Experimenta in a way responding to that need. So there was in 1998 already that need of talking about design coming from the cultural perspective and in a very anthropological perspective as well. So the first program, and I would say maybe the first 5 editions of Experimenta, they were very, very much into that work line. So for me now, when I see the Victoria and Albert Museum seeing that, for me, this is a bit going back to the past for me as a curator. So it's not my major guideline because of that, because in fact I was worried with that 15 years ago. I'm personally, but I think it's fundamental to be done, of course, also because the tools that they have now available 15 years after 1999 they are completely different. And Victoria and Albert Museum, they have a very important role and important structure that then can use in terms of curatorial approach. But for me, my perspective now, it's definitely much more connected with bringing design as a discipline to society, and not necessarily as a curatorial process. I'm more interested in that than in curating.
But of course, design is a discipline that is working in cultural anthropology. So if it's social anthropology and the questions raised are the question of design, it's about power, it's about gender, it's about rituals. This is everything that design has dealt with and will be dealing with in the future. I think these are major topics for curators, for designers, and for our public. So if that answers the question.
It does.
Yeah.
So given that I know both of you see so many design projects and exhibitions all over the world, could I ask you each to give an example of design curation that has really inspired and excited you? Not your own work, something that somebody else has done. So Lily, you first of all.
It's a little difficult, but in this case, I'd like to come back of a work of my father. He curated the opening exhibition of the Cooper-Hewitt Museum in 1976, and this exhibition has been coming back to me in the past months because there's a couple of researchers working on it now. So I looked at material to hand it over, and I've seen it as a 4-year-old child, this exhibition, and I know now more than ever that it has strongly influenced me. Being an exhibition that looked at design and connected the collection of the Smithsonian Institution with everyday objects in a very special way. And so I can say this has been an influence on me that I'm sort of now seeing with new eyes in my professional career.
And for the avoidance of doubt, Lily's father is Hans Herlein, the Austrian architect and curator. Güte, can you think of a particularly inspiring example?
It's funny because I go much more to concerts and to art exhibitions and to other sort of cultural events, and that I go to design events. This is really being sincere, completely sincere. So I do, of course, I do go to see many exhibitions, design exhibitions, but I tend to go more to other fields of cultural fields. Nevertheless, I always remember, it was part of the program of Experimenta, but it was not curated by me. The exhibition that was curated by Miguel Vieira Batista on Little Rams. It was a very well done exhibition, extremely well done exhibition, very clear, very pragmatic, very, I don't know, I keep on having this image of this exhibition. And of course the exhibition that Paula did at MoMA some years ago, which name
Which one? Design and the Elastic Mind?
Yes. Design and Elastic Mind.
Yeah, which was a landmark in terms of design's relationship to technology.
But it was also reflecting a moment, a curatorial moment all over the world. So Paula did it in MoMA, but we were most of all, we were talking about that issue. So, but of course, it was a very good exhibition in many aspects, and it was very a trigger for many curators, and it was a trigger for the audience as well. So it had a very important role. But I tend, and this is really, to be honest, I tend to think about design without seeing that much design exhibitions or design museums. It's true.
Well, and
we're both cowards.
Well, one of the big issues in curation in all fields is, of course, digital technology and the new opportunities that it can unlock. And this is an area where I think incontestably design has been very much at the forefront, particularly because of Paula's work at the Museum of Modern Art. She did the first website for a major museum exhibition, I think anywhere in the world, and she has just done a major major online exhibition, Design and Violence, which has been curated solely to go online. So I'd be very interested in what you both see as the possibilities and also the risks of the use of digital technology in design curation, and other interesting examples that you've come across that your fellow curators have developed.
I don't see any risks in integrating or looking at the digital culture at this stage, because I simply think it is the time to find a way of coping with it. And here I think design has better circumstances than art and classical museums that, in my opinion, sometimes try in a very strange way to sort of integrate a digital culture. I don't know, Jean-François Lyotard did an exhibition at the Centre Pompidou which was dealing sort of with digital culture at that time, which is, I think, 84 or so. I think there will be, or as I just mentioned, Paola's exhibitions that, like mutant materials or so, they always have set milestones in the way of looking at the decade. And I think this is the decade where we wait for the big thing that gives us an idea of what digital culture is at this stage and what it could move to in future. I think that I'd love to have a curator that solves this problem in a brilliant way.
Gutta.
Well, I'm just coming from Norway. I went there to have some meetings about design education and things like that. But I had a very good meeting with a software designer coming from the States. He's based in Norway and is working with a group of software developers. Just to say that I think that as a curator, but also as being running Experimenta, which is an experimental platform, I would say that I've been waiting for these moments when we reach a technological capacity that we reach now. This is the moment, in fact. So I think that for the first time you have interfaces and you have software that really can change many things in terms of the curatorial discourse or investigation or sharing information. This is the moment. So 5 years ago, it would have been impossible because the interfaces and the connection between the body, the mind, and the machine, they were not there yet. Now they are. I think that they are finally there. For designers, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and for curators as well, in all the aspects.
So what sort of things do you envisage doing with this technology?
Yeah, it's very curious. So we are, in fact, investing a lot on that at Experimenta at this moment, a lot. Trying to understand how can we fill this gap, which is now is a gap, this gap between a huge amount of research, not only on the curatorial level, but also on a technological level, a huge amount of knowledge here, to the public. And how can this also be a tool for designers at the same time, but at the same time for curators and researchers? So we are investing on that now, trying to achieve this interface that really works well. Because for me, it is a question of interface, and it is a question of the model, the distribution model. So it needs to be fast, easy to download, very easy to handle with, very easy to it needs to be very emotional driven and body connected as well. So there are many interesting dimensions here that we are addressing now. And when I say we, it's because it's a process that really, to happen seriously and on a deep way, it needs to be shared by the people that are involved in software, but also by the curators themselves. So it needs to be a joint venture between those two groups. And in fact, we are working on that. I hope we can achieve something in 1 year and a half, but not sooner than that.
So sorry, Lily.
I confess I respect your role as a moderator here today, but as you are one of the most influential critics in design, I'd love to hear what your answer to your question is.
About digital technology.
Yes,
well,
because
I think that both Paula and Jan Bolen have done a phenomenal job in contextualizing the impact of digital technology on our lives. Paula with exhibitions like Design and the Elastic Mind and Talk to Me, which really analyzed the new role of objects as communicators to us rather than supine, three-dimensional, functional things. And Jan Bolen in all the work he did on digital production technologies like 3D printing and similar projects at Z33. But I think what really interests me is how curators in the future are going to integrate digital technology into their exhibitions by creating lasting archives of the research for the exhibition or the biennial or the festival, and also by dynamizing the debate about the exhibition at the time. So Design and Violence, the MoMA online exhibition, is a great example of this. But if I go back historically, I remember Documenta in the very early 2000s, I think it was maybe in the year 2000, that was the first time I actually came across a really interesting online exhibition. It was super simple. The curators approached artists in different parts of the world and asked them to recommend other artists' online projects that they found interesting. And it could be work specially created for the web, which was relatively unusual then, or an artist's website. And then that artist recommended another. So it was like this endless game of hopscotch. So technically it couldn't have been simpler. But at the time when I think in general curators weren't being particularly imaginative about technology's potential, it was an incredibly exciting and inspiring way of showing what a difference digital technology can make. And I think that that's only going to sort of be built on in future. But as we're going to have to wrap up in a moment, I'd like to end by asking both of you, given that I think we have a consensus that design curation has transformed dramatically in the last decade, spawning endless master's courses in it, many, many more exhibitions, many, many more festivals like your own, and much more interesting work. What do you think are the big challenges for the future for it? Because clearly it's achieved a lot already, but what are the critical issues it needs to wrestle with to become a really intellectually dynamic force in the future? So Lily, to you first.
Well, I think that design at the moment plays a more important role than in the last 3 decades. But the question is, how long will that last, and what will that mean to curation? And as you said, there are so many master courses. Where will all these people go? And is theorizing the whole thing the right way, which I personally doubt. So I think...
Sorry, why do you doubt that?
Because I think that design is it is not only, I mean, with art it's the same. You would have curators that have a very theoretical approach, or I mean, okay. The way you stage it, maybe this is the question, and I think, as I said previously, design should be accessible, as it is still an everyday culture. So at the same time, I think that the role of design or of the design curator at the moment can be someone who manages to join movements in architecture and in art that go towards a similar direction. So I think this looking deeper at social issues is a current development in all of these three disciplines, and I think that would be an interesting field to sort of look that design can cope and keep up with the other disciplines.
Guta, what do you think are the big challenges?
You ask, are you asking about curating design or design as a discipline?
Well, the two are of course interlinked, but I'm asking, as the theme is curating design, specifically about
Curating
curating
design.
yeah.
Personally, what I would like to see in the future, I see the work of curator as a sort of a catalyst sometimes. And I think that curators can be fundamental for the development of the discipline if they invest more, if they want to do that, of course, in creating space for designers to research more. So if we have more curators and more institutions investing more money in doing projects, curatorial projects that are in fact based on research and on creating time, space, money to do serious research, I would see it as very important. So I think that it is important, of course, to discuss and to present the past, to analyze the past, to think about the present. But as I see design as a fundamental, really fundamental tool for this century, I would like to see curators more actively involved in producing contexts that really allow designers to move forward. In a similar way, some galleries do that. You know, some galleries that are, in a way, following the same model that art galleries do. They are providing that sort of conditions to designers to research more. I think that curators can also do that. So I tend to prefer exhibitions where I feel that there was a serious investment coming from the curator on giving time, space, and money and whatever for the designers to create more. For me, that would be very, very important for the next 5 years if we could have a group of institutions, a group of curators, a group of critics investing on that specific guideline.
Well, that's a very productive note to end on. We were told by the organisers not to ask for questions from the audience, but to invite you to mingle with us afterwards. So obviously any questions you have, do come up and have a chat. Thank you very much for coming, and huge thanks to Lili Helijn and Guta Moura-Guedes and to Miart. Thank you.